And at some time during the flight, the captain started feeling bad.
Your stress levels are high. You're probably sweating. You're feeling startled yourself. So you're going to sit in your seat, and the first thing is just Kayla, look at what's going on. Are we flying safely?
But what will the military think if we start diverting without any transponder, without any radio contact in the London area?
And there's no safety argument that I can even imagine where this would make sense.
So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone out there, and very welcome to this first ever Captain Speaking podcast. How are you doing, Ben?
I am very, very well. I'm super excited to crack on with this now.
Yeah, we have been planning this for months now, it feels like. And I mean, maybe we should just get into what we're trying to do with this podcast.
Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan.
I mean, I have always felt that even though I love doing the scripted videos that we do, which is really, really informative, it feels like we can't really get our own personalities out. So I wanted to do this podcast to talk about things in aviation, outside aviation, in our lives, what happens, but do so in an unscripted way that felt a little bit more authentic, I guess.
Yeah, and it's been a long time coming, isn't it? I think just you and I just being able to talk through scenarios is something that we've wanted to do for some time. So the podcast just made sense.
Yeah, and I mean, we find ourselves, I mean, we talk to each other when we're planning things for Mentour Now. We can sit for hours and just discuss, what do you think about this? This is crazy. Yeah. Why did they do it this way? And we thought maybe that's the kind of discussions that people actually want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we enjoy it. We bounce off each other and we're coming up with ideas and it works. So let's do it together.
So for those of you who actually have not followed Mentour Pilot or Mentour Now or are following the Airline Pilot Performance on Instagram, maybe we should explain a little bit who we are. So I'll kick off. My name is Petter Hörnfeldt. I'm a 43-year-old Swedish guy, married, 2 boys, 2 dogs, and I've been working as an airline pilot since 2002, so that's about 23 years now. And for the last 2 years, I have been focusing mainly on what I do here, which is creating my 2 YouTube channels, Mentour Pilot and Mentour Now, and now this third one, Captain Speaking. So what about you, Ben?
Yeah, I always smile because our careers are very, very similar, aren't they, in the way that they've kind of panned out. I mean, I started at a similar time. I came from another airline. I came from KLM UK, which was a small little subsidiary of KLM on the 737-300, and then moved over onto the 800 with the current employer. Been there, 20 years next month, which is frightening.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It goes so fast. And I mean, I meet cabin crew now, I say hello, and they're like 20. You're like, you were born. You were just being born when I joined. I'm like, oh my God.
I know. And I mean, especially when you're into social media, like we both are. Now I'm starting to come across new pilots as well. It's like, I was 13 when I started watching your show, and now I'm in the cockpit. And
wow.
And it those kind of, like, the time really stretches, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's frightening. It really does.
It's frightening, but it's cool as well.
Yeah.
I feel better now than I've ever done, which is why we're doing, I guess, so many different projects.
Yeah.
What have you been up to this week? Have you been actually flying?
I have. It's been a pretty busy week. I've done 5 days of flying this week. Had a couple of an unscheduled overnight, some aircraft changes. It's been a busy one. But it's been nice to get out of the sim, actually, get my vitamin D for the week and get out of the sim and do it. And it's been quite a nice mix of regular flying with a bit of instructing as well. So it's been a busy, but it's been a good week.
That's interesting what you mentioned vitamin D, because there's been different discussions whether or not you need to use sunscreen when you're in the cockpit or not.
It's true.
Have you heard anything about that? No,
I need to ask that question. My brother's a doctor, actually, and he specializes in that kind of stuff. So I should really, really ask him the question. I always put the sun blinds up when the sun is kind of beating. You know that feeling when you're sitting there and the sun's out and you can really feel it. So I always put the sun blinds up just to make sure. But it's something we should be aware of.
Yeah, sure. Because I'm sure that, there's UVA filters and stuff in the aircraft windows, and they're really thick. Yeah. I mean, but we're really high up. Obviously, cosmic radiation is a thing that we can discuss in a different podcast, but it is definitely a thing. And using sunglasses is a must, because otherwise your retinas is going to go after a few years. But the thing about I've seen colleagues actually putting sunscreen on.
Me too.
I've never really understood whether or not that is a thing, or if it's just something that,
I don't know. And it's like most things nowadays, you're also seeing stuff about actually sunscreen isn't that good for you. There's that side of it as well. So if you're doing that every day you're at work, is that more risky than just sitting there in the cockpit without it? I don't know. There's a lot to talk about there potentially, but
I'm gonna guess that it actually is. Like,
yeah, me too.
but we'll see. Once we've done an entire career, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, the way that I kind of envisage this podcast and the way that we do it is that we will take different things that is being talked about during the week. We're going to try to do this weekly. Can't promise anything yet because this is the pilot. the episode. But we are going to take kind of what's going on both out in the big wide world but especially what's happening in the aviation world, and then we will discuss it and see what we think about it, if there's anything to learn from it, things like that. And we will take maybe 2 or 3 different stories that's happening, and it's going to depend a lot on you guys out there. You know, if you come with feedback on our videos that we release or on these videos, that's going to be available both on YouTube and on anywhere that you can find a podcast, really, then we will look at that and we will form the content after what you are interested in. So this is the first one, which means that we are just going to grab a couple of stories now that we feel interesting ourselves. And but that's how it's going to be going forward, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the more people get involved, the better it gets.
Yeah, I mean, this is about community, and we have a huge community now. Everyone out there loves aviation. Either they are pilots themselves, which is actually a pretty small group, but there's a lot of people out there who are just curious about what's going on, because aviation is kind of a microcosm for the rest of the world. Like when the economy starts sliding, the aviation world will notice it first. We will see it. We will see how our employers and the airlines at large react to it. So there's a lot of things that you can kind of bake into a podcast like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am so excited to be actually able to do this podcast, because we've been trying for a while. But one thing that has enabled us to start right now is that we've actually got our first sponsor for this episode, which is NordVPN, one of my long-term sponsors that is supporting a lot of things that we do here. And I know that you have a little bit of a story of them, don't you?
I do. And it's one that will actually make you smile because you played a part in this. So I was in San Francisco in a hotel using the hotel Wi-Fi, which I've learned is not a wise thing to do. And I was logging into some of my social media accounts to create a bit of content, as you do. And all of a sudden, I started getting these password reset email requests. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, someone's trying to hack into my account here. No way I can have that. And then one of your adverts popped into my mind and thought of NordVPN. So you thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. I downloaded NordVPN, activated it, and the problem went away. The password request resets went away, and it worked. It did the job. So I've been a convert ever since.
I know. This is why I'm so happy to have them as sponsors, actually, because they do genuinely have a good product. And they have loads of these really powerful cybersecurity tools, like their Threat Protection Pro, for example, and things like that. And not, on top of the fact that they are a great VPN as well, super fast, so you can see things. I always use them to watch hockey when I'm out traveling, for example, because I can't access it otherwise. But we're going to talk more about NordVPN later on in the video. So if you're interested in following Ben's example and get them right now, well, then there's going to be a QR code somewhere here that you can scan with your phone and use it. And obviously, we're going to have a link to it in the video description below as well. But for now, let's get on with our first big story.
What have you got?
So there's a couple of stories that's been surfacing recently about pilot incapacitations.
Yes.
Right? For those of you who don't know what that is, a pilot incapacitation is basically when one out of the 2 pilots starts feeling sick and cannot fulfill their role, right? So it ranges from sudden stomach flu, which just means that you cannot really do your job properly, to full-on incapacitation, which might be unconsciousness or even death. So these 2 stories that have surfaced recently, one had to do with low-fare airline Ryanair. This surfaced just a few weeks ago, and it was a story about a very experienced captain flying from Dublin down to Milan Bergamo in Italy, together with a very inexperienced, basically brand new first officer. And at some time during the flight, the captain started feeling bad and became incapacitated, which meant that now this very young very fresh out of training first officer had to do what they had been trained for in the simulator, but that you never think is going to happen to you, right? And we don't know much about this incident because it was handled so beautifully by this young first officer that once the report was filed about it, the authorities actually said that, listen, this was just done according to the way it should be. There's no need for a further full-on investigation here. It would have been if something had gone wrong, but in this case, it looks like, from what we've learned, that the first officer, he took the time to talk to the cabin crew. Or I don't know, it could be a she actually, but we know this is a young, inexperienced first officer. They talked to a traffic control, issued a mayday call, which we'll talk about later, and then took their time to continue down. They entered holdings, briefed, set everything up, landed, and then stopped on the runway in Bergamo, because from the right seat you can't maneuver the aircraft, you can't taxi it, and a first officer is not trained to do so. So it looks like a picture-perfect execution of how you're supposed to deal with an incapacitation.
Yep.
So that's one thing. And I just wanted to mention that because I might actually do a video on that and something else, because it's really important for people to see how well one pilot can do this job that is designed for two pilots.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to go into that more because we don't know that many details, but there is another one where we just got the final report, which means that there was an investigation done. And this is about a Lufthansa flight that took place on the 24th of February last year, to 2024. And it was going from Frankfurt to Sevilla in Spain. And this one is super curious. We're talking about two pilots that have been flying together for a couple of days. And this was the last flight on a 4-day trip together. Probably a fourth, like a two-leg forth and back to Sevilla. And everything was going fine. They knew each other. Everything had been working great. I think the first officer was like 35 or 38 years old, like, in prime time, basically. Flying down to Sevilla, came into the Spanish airspace. They were about 88 miles northeast of Madrid when the captain needed to go to the toilet, as we do. It happens. And especially with the amount of coffee that we drink. So he went out, and here comes the first really interesting bit, which I want to hear your thoughts about.
Yeah.
So after the terrible accident to the German Wings aircraft that flew into the Alps, there was never really a rule, but there was kind of a consensus in the industry that there should never be one pilot left in the cockpit, that there should always be a second person there, cabin crew, if the other pilot needed to go to the toilet, right? In this case, it seems like Lufthansa has moved away from that. And what it said in the final report was basically that they would verify that the remaining pilot felt good, both physiologically and psychologically. And if that was the case, that pilot could be left alone in the cockpit. Spontaneously, what's your thought about that?
Yeah, not good. I mean, I for something that's so simple to remedy, it seems, why not have two people in there? For the sake of sending a cabin crew in, why not? The thought of just having one person in the flight deck, to me, just feels so alien. Throughout my entire career with my current employer, previous employer, it's just always been two.
Yeah, it's interesting because that rule of having two people in the cockpit, that was in place well before Germany.
Yeah.
Right? That was not something that came with German Wings. It was something like, it just made intuitive sense to make sure that if something happened to that well, you never know. Like aneurysms happens like this, stroke happens like that. It doesn't come with a 3-minute warning,
No, and the whole of aviation is built around redundancy, isn't it? Resiliency and redundancy. And it seems this is a little weak part of the chain that we have no redundancy for if there's one person in there.
No, exactly. So, I mean, I know I've heard people discussing like, well, what about, how much security clearance have the cabin crew gone through? Is there a risk that someone is going to come in that actually have nefarious intentions? But I mean, at some point you have to actually trust the crew that is operating the aircraft, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I apply for an airport security card, as you do, as every pilot person that works airside, so once you're past security, we all have to have a very, very comprehensive background check, which takes a huge amount of time to go through. And once you've got that, your background is clear and you're approved to work airside and on aircraft and so on. So my take on that is either you're trusted or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you're not, then you shouldn't really be there in the first place.
No, and I would completely agree with that. But anyway, so what happened in this case was that there was no one left with the first officer. The first officer was pilot flying already, so there was no need to change over roles or anything. The captain just handed the radios over to the first officer. He went out, locked the door, because that's one thing that has come from September 11th, the 9/11 attacks, that the cockpit doors on commercial aircraft are now locked, right? So the door locked. He went and did his thing. And about a minute after the captain had left the cockpit, the first officer had some kind of seizure. The cockpit voice recording was collected after the incident, as well as the flight data recorder. And it showed that about a minute in, they could hear physical sounds of the first officer having a seizure, a severe seizure. And as he was doing so, he started probably flailing around. We don't have cameras in the cockpit, so we don't know exactly what happened, but you could see on the flight data recorder that certain systems started changing, as in it seemed like he was hitting buttons. It included switching listening to the Morse signal from the VOR, for example. One of the SEC computers, as the flight control computers, was turned off, and this is the real deal here. The right rudder pedal was pushed in, right? So the seizure was severe, and it caused him to push the rudder. And that is not good when you're flying at Mach 0.79 or 0.8. Like, the rudder is a huge surface in the back. Now, fortunately, the Airbus system recognized that there should not be any rudder pushing here, right? And it's a fly-by-wire aircraft, so all the inputs are basically computer signals that goes to the actuator, but it goes through a computer, and the computer gets the chance to kind of think if this makes sense or not. So the computer said basically, stop pushing rudder. Instead of actually moving the rudder much, it did move a little bit, but not much. But it said, stop pushing rudder. You should not be pushing rudder now, basically. And the autopilot remained engaged. Now, this is an Airbus, and you can actually push the rudder enough on an Airbus as well to disconnect the autopilot. In this case, that was not done. It did not reach the threshold value. But this is not good. Like this, we now have an incapacitated pilot with seizures that is pushing rudder controls in the cockpit with the other pilot outside. What would happen if you did that on, say, a Boeing 737?
You've applied rudder on a Boeing 737 at that speed. It's going to disconnect the autopilot very quickly, because the aircraft's going to want to yaw in the direction that you apply the rudder. And the autopilot's going to try and overcome that with the ailerons, because it has no rudder authority at all. And it gets to a point where the ailerons just can't keep the wings level anymore and overcome the yaw. So the autopilot goes, okay, it's your aircraft. And now you're in it. You're going to get the yaw, you're going to get the roll, and you get into like a spiral dive very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's frightening.
That is frightening. Because with that comes G-forces.
Yep.
And obviously, you'd hope that whatever happened to the pilot maybe was temporarily, right? And it was in this case. But you never know. And if the rudder is kept pushed, there's very little potential that you can do from the outside. You're going to be pushed up against walls and stuff, and G-forces are not to be played with. So this is, like you said, the autopilot will try to fight it on a Boeing as well, but it will definitely, if you tell the rudder to move on a Boeing, it will move, right?
Yeah.
There is a reduction mechanism in it that will make it move less at higher speeds than it does at lower speeds, but it will move. It will like, okay, yeah, you want me to yaw? I will yaw. And so anyway, what happened here was that the aircraft just made a tiny little change in it. Actually continued to follow the track. The autopilot stayed engaged, and the captain was outside now trying to get in. And there's different ways. We can't really go into all of the details around how the door works because there's safety and security concerns around that. But basically, you input a code to tell the other pilot that I want to get in now, and generally that's enough so that the door can be opened from the inside. He tried that, got no response, thought that he put the wrong code in, tried again, no response, and did so 5 times. Okay. Then, after that, there is an emergency procedure that you can do, right? And they started doing that emergency procedure. This is made so for exactly this kind of situations where the one that's inside just cannot let you in.
And what would be going through your head? You can imagine it. You're standing there now. I mean,
I cannot even imagine. Because, what would have gone through my mind would have been, I just left this person that was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
He's not responding. And this has happened before.
Yeah.
Like this, the hairs literally stand up on my arm when I think about it. Not to mention what passengers who obviously are seeing this. Now, hopefully they don't understand what they're seeing. But the panic that could start from something like that, if they would understand, would be, come very quickly.
I'd be terrifying.
I'd be terrified. Because there's so little you can do. You're outside of a door that is built to be able to handle pistol fire. Yep. You will not break in through that door. It's made not to. So anyway, when they were about to start entering this emergency procedure, it looks like the pilot inside woke up. Or got out of the seizure and could actually open the door and let the captain back in, right? There's a problem there as well, and that is if you are suffering from a seizure, you could end up not opening the door but actually deny opening the door. And if that's the case, then you have further problems. But in this case, everything went fine. They came in. The cabin crew, as per procedures, removed the sick pilot from his seat, and actually in this case brought him out into the galley, which would indicate that he was definitely not feeling well.
Yeah,
because you don't if he's feeling okay, you
leave him.
You leave him, and you maybe administer oxygen from the oxygen mask or something like that. But in this case, they took them out and they made a PA for a medically suitable personnel, and there was actually a doctor on board that was kind enough, because we should mention that it's they could deny doing that. But in this case, they were kind enough to help and continue doing so. So now the captain is alone in the cockpit. What is generally the procedure if you find yourself like that?
Yeah, so the first thing you're going to do is it goes back to the old aviate, navigate, communicate, doesn't it? List of priorities. So you're going to kind of sit there. Obviously, your stress levels are high. You're probably sweating. You're feeling startled yourself. So you're going to sit in your seat. And the first thing is just kind of look at what's going on. Are we flying safely? Is the autopilot engaged? Do I need to change anything? They're out of their seat now, so that risk is gone. The cabin, it's a little bit out of the usual kind of routine, because normally we would alert the cabin crew, wouldn't we, that the pilot is incapacitated. So you're kind of jumping in a few stages into the procedure here. But then that's flying, isn't it? Things not always take the same shape as how you're trained. No. And you've got to be kind of dynamic with it, haven't you? So they've got the sick pilot out now, and he's now checking that everything's working properly. He's now going to get a mayday call out to let them know that something's good, that they are on a single pilot, that there is a pilot incapacitation, potentially telling them to stand by, and then he's going to be making a bit of a plan. He's going to be looking, where am I? Need to be landing at the nearest suitable airport, looking at weather, looking at NOTAMs, and then is there a doctor on board, which they've already got by this point. And then it's going to be initiate. Once they've got a plan, we're going to be either continuing or diverting or returning. They're going to implement that. And the key thing here is just not to rush, isn't it? The tendency, I think, is just to go. But as you know, that's going to make your life harder.
Oh, absolutely. And this is something that going back to the Ryanair example, it seems like that was something that really had been hammered home with that first officer, because the first officer went into holdings and set everything up and discussed everything. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, I have my colleague is super sick, we need to get them onto the ground quickly. And by doing so, stressing so that you're actually now potentially causing a risk to all of your passengers in the aircraft for trying to save this person. So it's counterintuitive, and the stress will push you. But it's interesting because you mentioned making a mayday call. In this case, what happened was that the captain did exactly what you said, checked around, realized that they were just above Madrid, which is a big, nice airport. They flew a little bit past Madrid in order to get some distance, but almost immediately told air traffic control that they needed to do a medical diversion. Started getting vectors back down towards Madrid, and during the descent they declared an emergency, but they declared a medical emergency.
Okay.
So they didn't declare actually a emergency due to pilot incapacitation. And
Okay.
there is a difference between those two, which brings us to something that's super interesting. And that is, of course, we are seeing authorities out there now, both in Europe and in the United States, talking about maybe we can allow single pilot operations, maybe under certain circumstances, there can be one pilot left and the other one can go rest, or what can we do? But when you have a pilot incapacitation, per definition today, it is an emergency because you're down to one essential system.
Yep.
Right? You're down to only one person can now safely get this aircraft down on the ground.
Yep.
And whenever you do, that's the same with generators. Right?
Yep.
We have 3 of them. And if you lose 2, you're down to 1, and you have to avert. It's a mayday.
Yep.
Right? So what's your thought about this when you hear things like this and they combine it with what the authorities are actually trying to do?
Yeah, it shocks me that it's even being entertained. And at the end of the day, whichever way you dress it up, it's all there to save money, isn't it? That's it. It's there to save money, and there's no safety argument that I can even imagine where this would make sense.
No.
And there's plenty of scenarios where that just wouldn't work. And this one's a perfect one. Let's say, I mean, the standard incapacitation. I know there's scenarios out there like the Cirrus jet, I believe. Obviously, that's single pilot. There's a big red button that says "Do not push unless the pilot's dead," effectively. And when it does, it very cleverly selects an alternate, gets the weather, NOTAMs, declares a mayday, and will descend and land, which is incredibly clever. But what it doesn't cover is these subtle incapacitations or the partial incapacitations where the pilot isn't making sensible decisions or pressing things they shouldn't be pressing.
Yep.
Then what happens?
And who's going to push the button on an airliner inside of the locked door?
Yeah.
And I mean, in this, like just like you're saying now, in this case, just take this case, which is not a fictional scenario; it's an actual scenario. You have a pilot that's inputting on the controls. Right, the pilot is pushing rudder and they're pressing buttons and it's doing things. So there's nothing in there where an AI could say, "Okay, so this pilot is clearly incapacitated." Maybe you could reason that, well, what he's doing is not making sense. So maybe. But the problem is that, and this I've been saying this for years, right? People have the opinion that you can go down from 2 to 1 pilot because we went from 3 to 2.
Yeah.
But going from 3 to 2 was a matter of finding smarter ways of doing things. Essentially, it's the FMC, the flight management computer, that replaced the flight engineer. All of a sudden, the computer was doing all of these fuel calculations and could tell us how much fuel we would have on arrival and what to do. And then you have ECAM and things like that actually do what the flight engineer do and does it well. And you still have 2 pilots, 2 decision makers that can discuss the best way forward and execute it, right? So going from 3 to 2, or in Russian cases, they have like 10 and 5 going down. But going down to 2, sure, right, can be done. You can go up to 3 or 4 if you need augmented crew for rest, right? Cool. But going from 2 to 1, what you're doing then is basically you're saying we are going from 2 to 0.
Yeah.
Because you have to assume that the remaining pilot will also become incapacitated, which does happen, as we can see.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So now you have to have a system that is so foolproof that it can and will safely take over this in any kind of perceivable scenario, even when the autopilot has been disconnected because the pilot has been pushing rudder and stuff. And then fly in and land reasonably safely somewhere.
Yeah.
In my view, that would require sentient AI.
Yeah.
That would require an AI that is essentially a person. That can be that second person.
Yeah. I mean, I came across an interesting pilot incapacitation event recently where they were both in the flight deck. the captain suddenly felt very sick, and the FO told me that he's like, "Okay, you okay?" And suddenly he went very pale, and his eyes started to roll back. He's like, "Oh my god," his head went back. But then he projectile vomited over pretty much everything, spectacularly, which had a couple of problems. But one of them, conceivably, you've now got a lot of liquid over a lot of electronics. And if these systems, these very clever systems, are electronic and things start shorting out, it stops working. You haven't now got a pilot that can do the raw stick and rudder flying that you and I can do if things do start to go horribly wrong and you start to lose displays or airspeed or comms or whatever it might be. There's that element to it as well. You've got to look at every conceivable scenario here.
I know, and it's so like I know people are going to watch this and listen to this and say that, well, they're just trying to protect their jobs. Of course, they're going to say this. It makes perfect sense. But no, I am not flying at the moment, right? I am in this way. I am completely unbiased. If they would come to me and say, Petter, when we do this is going to be safer for the passengers. Right, we can show you that this AI together with one pilot is not only as safe as we have now. It's even safer because we have all of these safeguards out there that will now be available and is not. I would be the first one to say that. Well, yeah, good. I mean, I guess we had people that did the elevators for us before and they disappeared. So that is due to happen, and then we will try to implement it in the safest possible way. But that's not the case.
It's not, and it's not. It's everything we do in aviation is striving to keep it safer, to get that bit better, that bit safer, and this is just going back so far.
You know what really, really pisses me off when I talk about this? It's the fact that, like a first officer's salary, right? It's like changing a tire on a Boeing 737.
Oh yeah.
Like you change one tire, which we do repeatedly every week. That is a first officer's salary for that week, that month, probably that month actually. The same as like a screw costs $157. Like everything costs so much money here. So I understand that they are going to try to save where they can, but we're talking about saving, like a reduction in safety that will be so huge compared to what it costs that it cannot possibly be motivated. It just cannot. And then we have the next step, which is our current fleet of aircraft are built for 2 pilots. Yeah. They're not prepared for this. Yeah. So what we're talking about is potentially a new aircraft type that's going to have to be certified with this system. The costs of inventing this system and certifying it to keep it with passengers, to fly with passengers, and the time that it would take. Remember, like we started 25 years ago, and during that time, the only thing that we've really seen in technological change is like GPS approaches.
Yeah, really.
We haven't seen anything change.
No.
It's the tiny incremental smart decisions changes made, but in terms of hardware,
very little.
Very, very little. You'll see those kind of leaps happening on small general aviation aircraft and in private jets as well. But in terms of airliners, no. So what we're talking about is actually like an airline that would want to do this. First of all, they would have to then try to explain to the passengers why they should be flying with one pilot, which I think is going to be a hard discussion to have.
It's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, and then they are going to have to change their current aircraft types into these new certified aircraft types, which with the time things takes now 30 years. Yeah. Let's say 20 to be really, really positive. But the cost of changing an aircraft fleet is humongous, especially if you now compare to what you will save by taking away your first officer's salary.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's stupid. I don't understand what this is all about.
I think it can almost go back to the old, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. And I think Airbus have got this in their head that they want to push the boundary. They want to make this happen. But for what they're losing the big picture potentially here, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with what Airbus is doing to a certain extent, because I think that they should be pushing the boundaries of what they can do. Right. Yeah. But what we're talking about here, I think, is EASA and the FAA and the regulators. They should be saying, that's neat. Cool, you can do that. Now you have an extra system that will make it even more safe, but we're
Yes.
not going to remove the pilot.
Yeah.
It's up to them to be the grown-ups in the room, to actually take that kind of decisions. Airbus is perfectly fine in inventing these systems. And I mean, nothing makes me happier than a secondary redundancy. You know, an aircraft that can land itself is fantastic. You know, maybe I mean, just think about you're you fly through volcanic ash and all the windows are completely now destroyed. You can't look out. Well, you know, have a system that can see the ground and can do a perfect autoland no matter what. Excellent. Great. You know, but don't take away a pilot. Don't use it to reduce the safety levels.
Yeah. I just can't see aviation. There's there's infinite amount of variables that could go wrong, as we've seen through the course of commercial aviation. And the manufacturers say it's impossible to train pilots for every scenario. They objectively say that. We need that resiliency. So if you can't train us for it, how can you have a program or a system that can cover every conceivable scenario?
No, like I said, it needs to be sentient. It
Yeah,
needs
it
to be
has
an AI that is the general intelligence.
It would have to be.
And in that case, then when that happens, then all bets are off. Then fine, because
we
then
got bigger problems. We got bigger problems.
After all, we're all monkeys. Like we have the problems that somatogravic illusion. We are what we are.
Yeah.
But to be honest, what you talked about before, which is like we can't train for every scenario, but you should be able to adapt for almost any scenario.
It's resilience.
Resilience. We are uniquely good at resilience. So anyway, we can continue forever. In this case, what happened was that the flight eventually, the captain did everything correctly. They landed. They got the first officer off. Apparently, there was a neurological issue that had gone undetected. You know, through all of the medical exams and everything, this was some kind of neurological thing that now has rendered him without a medical license. So he will not be able to fly, which is super, super sad. But it's like you said, you don't know if when an aneurysm can happen, for example. There's no checks or tests really for that. So very, very sad. A very positive outcome like it was a safe outcome. So the system worked because there were 2 pilots on board. You know, I wanted to take that up because I knew that this is a discussion that is ongoing at the moment, and I would just love to hear. And maybe we should try to invite one of the, someone from EASA, for example, to have them discuss this and explain. Like, I know some people there. I'm going to actually reach out and ask because it would be super interesting to hear. Yeah, cool. But anyway, do you have anything to add to piloting capacity?
No. It's an interesting topic, but no, let's get EASA here.
Yeah, that'll be our next goal.
Yeah,
so stay tuned and make sure that you have subscribed to the channel. Cool. So we're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, it's time for our next story, which is going to be about the Newark, not disaster, but outage, the ongoing trouble that's happening in the United States with their air traffic control system. So stay tuned. Earlier in this episode, you heard about Ben's unfortunate experience of getting hacked while using a hotel Wi-Fi. Now, that's a scary but sadly familiar reminder of how using unsecured networks when traveling can be really dodgy. That's why we both now rely on NordVPN, today's sponsor, and more specifically on their Threat Protection Pro feature. You see, beyond just encrypting your connection, it also actively blocks malicious websites, intrusive ads, and trackers. It even scans downloaded files for malware, which is super useful. And it does all of this in real time, even if you're not connected to a VPN server. Whether we are researching aviation incidents or simply browsing during layovers, it feels really good to have NordVPN covering our backs. And if you want to check them out as well, then use this QR code or go to nordvpn.com/captain. Yep, that's a new code, so nordvpn.com/captain. That will give you 4 extra months when you sign up for their 2-year deal. And remember, Nord always gives you a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you don't risk anything by trying them out. Thank you, Nord, for always supporting our ventures. Okay, so welcome back. So the next story we are going to talk about is the outages that's been happening to New York Airport in New York State. This has been an ongoing soap opera in the press for the last few weeks, and for good reasons. I did a video about this on Mentour Now, so if you haven't seen that, you should go and check it out. We go into great and extensive detail of what is happening. But what I want to do here is I'm just going to give an overview of what's going on, but then we will talk a little bit about what do pilots do in situations like this. Right? We got a lot of questions on that when we did the video. So to keep it short, the air traffic control system around, especially New York Airport, has undergone some changes lately. For whatever reason, a decision was taken about 6 months ago or a year ago to move the TRACON, which is the Terminal Radar Approach Control, move those controllers from the New York area where they were living and working, and move them to Philadelphia instead, which is a good 130 miles or 210 kilometers away from where they were, right? Why that happened, it seemed to have been that they were having problems recruiting people, and they thought if we move them there, then the cost of living is lower. There are some benefits to that, so maybe we can recruit more people. And they thought that they were going to get a lot of people, a lot of air traffic controllers moving. It turns out that not that many wanted to move. So already from the start, they were short-staffed in Philadelphia. TRACON, that was now handling New York. And on top of that, obviously, if you're moving away 130 miles, you're still going to have to work the radar scopes in that area. And those are connected to actual hardware. So actual radar, those spinning things that everyone sees. So now they had to rely on communications, data communications, and also analog communications, from what I understand, between those two sites. And they kind of went through copper wire. We're not talking state-of-the-art equipment here, but very, very old equipment. So inevitably, there started to be problems. And last year, they had an outage in Philadelphia in the TRACON, which meant that the controllers could not talk to the aircraft. Not nice.
Not good.
No, and couldn't see them either.
No.
So that caused problems already then. So bad problems, in fact, that the controllers that was working in that TRACON, several of them were so stressed out that they actually applied for medical leave, for stress leave. So they stopped working, which meant that the situation with air traffic controllers now became even worse. And then we had what happened now in April, just a few weeks ago, where another radar outage, partially because, or probably completely because of these outdated wires, happened again. And it raged havoc. First of all, of course, again, the radar disappeared, air traffic control communication disappeared, and that because Newark is they call it a fortress hub for United Airlines, their whole operation kind of collapsed, and that then spread out over the entire United States. So you had hours and hours of delays and people sleeping on the floor and all of those good things. But that's the background to it anyway. This is going to continue happening because we do have the same problem in several different airports in the United States. And Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transport, yes, he has announced that they are going to put a lot of money into trying to upgrade this and hire more air traffic controllers, but that is many years away in the best case scenario. So up until then, these kind of things are likely to continue happening. Now, if you, Ben, are flying in and you are talking to the approach controller, which is generally the second controller, or the second last before you talk to the tower, and you call them up and there's nothing, what do we do?
Yeah, it's you're like, okay. So it happens sometimes. They're changing controllers, they don't hear you, or you stepped over someone. So you try again. You're at control. This is call sign 1 2 3. Blah blah blah. Nothing. You're like, that's strange, because normally, obviously, it's chock-a-block. When you're coming into London airspace, which is what I know, it's crazy busy. So I guess you're not hearing anything. So you start checking your volume, I guess, have I knocked anything? Am I on the right frequency? Go back to the previous frequency. Maybe you get some joy there. So listen, we've got no response on this frequency. But yeah, if you're suddenly finding yourself very quiet, we generally have 3 radio boxes, don't we? We have what we call COM1, which is what we do all of our ATC communication on. COM2, which is a backup, but we normally use that for getting maybe weather or talking to ops. And then we have a COM3 as well, which we can use as another redundant system. So we might try box 2, try the same frequency on COM2. If that doesn't work, you're thinking, oh, geez, this is a long day. We probably then try on what we call guard frequency, 121.5, which is the international distress frequency. So we would type that in, say hello on there, see if we can reach somebody. Hopefully you should do. I would imagine, I assume that was working.
So no, in fact, even their emergency radios went out. But the good thing with 115 obviously is that even other stations outside of the area would be able to pick that up. So
yes,
other air traffic control centers would be able to answer. And I think here in this case, if they reverted back to their previous frequency, that wasn't the TRACON, that was probably the area controller, and
they might have got him.
They would have been able to continue. So in this case, I think that even though it probably created an enormous, like a storm of calls on frequencies where they shouldn't have been, eventually I think that they sorted it out and facilitated diversions if needed and started to sort things out. But let's say that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
I'm actually. We're working on a video right now about a crazy incident that happened to an EasyJet flight where they ended up without any radio at all, and no transponder either.
Jeez.
So that can happen. So what do we do? Like, what would you do with that?
Yeah, so we have something called a loss of comms procedure, which is not airline specific. It's an internationally agreed set procedure that we put in place so that everybody knows what's going to happen. But the problem with these procedures is that we have the set procedure. For example, you set a certain code in your transponder, 7600, if that's working. And that sends a code to air traffic to tell them we can no longer hear or maybe transmit on our radios. So they know that. As soon as you do that, you start a stopwatch. And we generally wait, depending on where you are, generally 7 minutes. But this has just changed, strangely, on the 15th of May. But you wait 7 minutes,
But it's changed because I missed that.
Yeah, it's just changed. Quite a few big changes, actually. So the 7 minutes is now 20 minutes.
Oh, I have to go back and look.
Yeah. And you can also squawk 7601, and you can do a VMC diversion. So there's a few. Yeah.
It's a visual meteorological condition. So it's if you can see where you're going.
If you can see.
Yeah.
But there's a few if buts, and every state has their own little variations on this. So it's not simple, and it's one of those scenarios I think most pilots secretly dread, because you're like, okay,
either. It's one of those like command upgrade things that if you really don't like someone, that's the question that you ask. So you're going into Gatwick and this happens. What will you do?
And the thing is, there's so many variations to it, you cannot remember it. So you have to go into the manual, and that's kind of why we have the 7 minutes or now 20 minutes. It gives everybody a bit of time to scratch their head, go into the manuals and go, okay, what exactly are we going to be doing in this particular, not only country, but particular airport as well?
Yeah, if the big airports, they definitely have their own loss of comm.
They do.
Yeah,
they do. And it takes, you've got to really make sure you understand it and apply it correctly, because if you air traffic will be assuming that you are going to be doing what it says in the book and clearing traffic away based on that. You then suddenly start doing something random. They might start thinking, maybe something a bit more sinister is at play here. And suddenly you got some F-16s next to you and your day gets even more complex.
Yep. No, it's a very, very bad day.
Yeah.
But the point to make here, which I think a lot of people were wondering about, is that even in the worst case scenario where we have no radio communication, we will follow procedures. We will follow procedures that exist because someone has thought about this happening. Now, it becomes a little bit more complicated if you have 50 aircraft that have this exact same problem, right? Because that no one has thought about. These procedures, they assume that is one single aircraft.
And it gets very complex when you think of it from that perspective. I've not thought of that before, because like a lot of places will say, okay, you route to a certain beacon to hold, you will descend to the minimum holding altitude, and then you will leave that on a certain time. But if you've got 20 aircraft all descending to the same level,
no. But in that case, I guess what I am, like you said, if we go out to 1215,
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is assuming that the radios on board the aircraft are still working. We're not talking about like an EMP has gone off and
True.
killed everything. We're talking about like the controller does not, and no controller works.
No,
We could potentially on 1-to-1.5 start to
that's true.
do our own thing.
Yeah.
Basically, like, I am here. Where are you? Okay, I am going to start descending now. No one else descends.
It's like what we used to do. Do you remember VFR flying? We used to do the same, didn't we? When the airport was closed, you say, "Oh, I'm overhead, descending dead side," and you build a picture of what's going on.
You could, but it would be extremely complex, and it would require a lot of patience, so that not everyone tries to come up with their own way of inventing the wheel, essentially. But again, resilience.
Yeah.
You do what you have to do, but in 99.9% of the cases, if you end up with no radios on board, which this EasyJet crew actually did, you follow that loss of comm procedure. In that case, also, they managed to get the transponder back working. They didn't know that they had managed, but they did, which helped, because then air traffic control could do what you said: just move everyone out of the way and let this aircraft get down onto its destination.
Yeah.
But this, like in this case, the amount of problems that they come across immediately. For example, they did think of, all right, we can't communicate. Maybe we're not even visible on the transponder is out, so we can't even be seen on secondary radar, which means we're only visible on raw radar, which is really just military most of the case. So we can't get any weather.
Nope.
If the weather was good, they were going to Bristol, I think.
Okay.
And if the weather is good, then sure, we can continue there. But what if the weather was not good, and they would have to divert? We can only, we only have the weather that we had dispatched with. But what will the military think if we start diverting without any transponder, without any radio contact in the London area?
Jeez.
Like that given the security situation that we live in, that could be potentially life-threatening.
Yeah, you'd have typhoons next to you 100%, and hopefully you could make some kind of visual contact with them. But you would definitely see some military aircraft next to you.
Oh, for sure. And what you don't want is to see that one military aircraft appearing behind you. It becomes very complicated very fast. But in this case, there's a lot of questions about, was this safe? It's not great. It degrades. But we talk. I wouldn't say that it's unsafe. I would just say that it degrades from a very high safety level to a slightly lower safety level. Yep. Which is the case, which is what we're talking about when reducing a pilot as well. Like if you take away something that's supposed to be there, obviously you're now introducing threats, risks. So was it dangerous? Probably not. Was it less safe than it was before? Yeah. And perfect. This is the way that people should see this. That if you have an aging system in force, which they clearly do now in the United States, you're going to start to see more and more of these outages. And for every time something like that happens, you have a lowering of the safety level, which is why it needs to be preemptively fixed rather than letting it go until you have to be reactive.
Because that's the problem, isn't it? Because now that they know this is going to happen again, the chances of this happening again is a certainty pretty much. And then if there was an issue, if there was a mid-air collision or something very close to that, the world's press and everybody, rightly so, will be jumping on this, going, you could see this happening, and yet nothing changed.
Exactly. I mean, it happened again in Denver last week.
Yeah.
It's a different airport, and it happened again in Newark this Monday.
Yeah. Whenever safety is reduced, like you said, is it then an accident waiting to happen? We're taking these Swiss cheese layers that we say, don't we, that all have to line up. If you're taking them away, they become a lot easier to line up.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, there's no question that there needs to be investments happening there quickly, and I think we're going to see that as well. So that's the good news here. But I wanted to go into it. Is interesting to look at it from a pilot's point of view.
Yeah, for sure.
And that again is where it's good to be too, because having these kind of discussions, you always give and take from your crew members here. Like I would love to sit with an experienced first officer and say, can you come up with, is there something we've forgotten here? Like, are we doing everything right now? I think that we are, but please tell me if you see something that is maybe there's a better way of doing this. Maybe you have a telephone number on your phone and you can get coverage when we're down at low altitude and reach air traffic control. And thinking out of the box is a good thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's that power of asking those open questions, isn't it? Is there anything you think we should be doing? Or is there any reason we shouldn't be doing this, what we're doing now? Is there anything you can think of trying to get that input?
This is why, like I always talk about PIOC, which is a decision-making model that we use.
Yep.
And when we teach that, it's about finding what the problem is, getting information, finding the options, selecting them, executing and evaluating. That's what PIOC stands for. But doing that, the way that we teach it is that if you are the more senior crew member, so you're the captain here, you should be asking these questions to your first officer and asking them, like you said, like open questions. Right? So how do you perceive the problem? What kind of options do you see we have? And the reasons for that is that if you probably know what the problem is or have a good idea of it and also what your options are. But it's likely that if you ask that and they have their chance to speak before you, they will speak about how they see it and they might see something that you have missed. Yeah. So you're now utilizing your crew in the best possible way, which is CRM, crew resource management. This is why I love working in this industry, because we've found out the hard way why it's so important to be able to do this type of teamwork and this kind of decision making, in an effective way.
Yeah, and a lot of it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Which is quite interesting. You would think from the outside looking in, you'd go, okay, well, the captain's the most experienced. Surely he should be sharing his ideas to guide the FO. But as you say, it doesn't work that way. We're all human beings. We can all miss things. But if you're the big captain and I'm the new FO and you say to me, Ben, I think this is the best course of action, do you agree? Suddenly it becomes very difficult for me to now go and actually, no, I don't agree with you. Exactly. That becomes very hard.
Yeah, and that's the point.
Yeah.
By the way, don't call me Shirley. Cool. No, it's super. These things, we can talk about these for hours, but we're not, because we have a limited amount of time. So we are going to go to break. And after the break, we will take some of your questions that have been popping up on different social media, because obviously you haven't had a chance to ask on this particular video, which I want you to do after this.
Yes.
Right. So we're going to go for a break. And when we're back, that's what we'll do. Right, Ben, we're back.
We're back.
Now it's up to the test, because we have not seen these questions.
No, we haven't. I have no idea.
I have been sent them via WhatsApp by one of our team members that have gone through and looked at these questions and decided which ones they think we could be answering. So we will see. Hopefully they're above board. But I will just read it out. Okay.
Okay.
So Niklo, spelled with loads of different variations here. Question to you, Peter, but it's going to be for you as well, Ben. And all aviation safety engineers out there. Why do all important warnings are primarily auditory? The master caution light does not convey much information about the situation other than it is critical, adding to the stress. When hearing is the first sense to lose in a highly stressful situation, it seems quite problematic and counterintuitive to me. That is a good question.
So I need to make sure I'm understanding that right. Is he saying, why are we using Audible or why are we not?
Yeah, the way I understand it is that I have done several videos where I say that the more the stress increases, the less you hear.
Yes.
So why are the warnings auditory?
I would say they're not, are they really? I think the only audible one we have is the fire.
Well, you have GPWS warnings.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm thinking master caution and... Yeah, but I would imagine if you have a GPWS, you also do have it visually on your PFD, don't you?
You do.
You do have both. Like TCAS, you'll have traffic, or climb, but you'll also have a visual representation on your PFD. Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything that's only audible. I mean, the terrain pull up.
No, you'd have it on the screen.
You do have it on screen as well, don't you?
Yeah. No, generally you have several.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. Again, it's that redundancy, isn't it? I think there is that. We have it in our face as well as any kind of audible background noise as well.
Yeah, what I would say is that I agree that there should be there's a possibility that we could add on to it. I was talking to one of my fantastic Patreons, by the way, about this. He was a sound engineer, and he's like, why isn't the warnings coming from different directions? Like, why don't you have localized warnings? A good example of that would be TCAS warnings. Why doesn't it say traffic from the right if the traffic is coming from the right?
Nice.
Yeah, and I had no good answer to that. I was like, of course it should be. I mean, we have Dolby Surround in our living rooms. Why wouldn't we have it in the cockpit? And it's not hard to make. And also, you could do it if people are wearing their headset, their Bose headset or whatever. You can have localized sound. So that is one way. I mean, at relatively low stress levels, that would be probably very, very effective.
Yeah. Oh, that's your situation awareness for sure.
Yeah, but otherwise, I'm a big fan of tactile warnings, because we are, like I said before, we are monkeys. Monkey say, monkey hear, monkey do. We this is why I don't like the Airbus's philosophy about the thrust levels standing still.
No.
For me, seeing the thrust level position moving, for example, is actually a visual sign of something going on.
Yeah.
So I am if we go back to that, this is what I would like to see. The stick shaker is a good example. Stick shaker is very unambiguous. You get a stick shaker, everyone knows, everyone feels, everyone hears it as well. So generally, that one, you don't miss that easily.
No. And my next door neighbor, funny enough, he's gone from a career decades of flying Boeing and transferred over to the Airbus, and he's not a fan. It takes he understands it, he flies it, and he knows obviously what everything does, but he doesn't really like the philosophy, is the impression that I'm getting.
No, there's something. I mean, obviously we're both Boeing pilots.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to say this. But there is something. There's something about that kind of removal of the basic kind of monkey brain.
Yeah, because you're brought up flying airplanes, aren't you? You're brought up flying and seeing and feeling, and that suddenly now is gone. I mean, I could be reading the weather on my iPad on my lap or something, and have my hand resting on the yoke and my other hand resting on the control column, and I can feel exactly what the airplane's doing.
Yep.
Combined with like the seat of your pants, and obviously the Airbus, you can't do that.
No.
And taking it to the extreme example, go looking at the Air France, the 447. There was the opposite inputs. That just wouldn't happen on a Boeing. You'd know.
No. One thing that should be just made like a legal requirement right now is the active side sticks.
Yeah.
Like if you have side sticks, fair enough, great.
Yeah.
But have them connected.
Yeah.
Right. And they exist. The same air. It's actually one of the I can't remember the name now, but one of the Russian aircraft that were being made, a new one that was being made. I should remember the name, but it's blanking. Actually had active side sticks, and they were buying those active side sticks from the same company that makes the side sticks for Airbus.
Okay.
So there's no question that you can get that. It should be able to be retrofitted, because then you get away from that problem. You can feel what the first officer is doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. You can maybe even have what the autopilot's doing, just to see what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think the Boom Supersonic, I think that's got active side sticks.
Yes, that it does. And I have actually talking to the CEO, and funnily enough, he mentioned that our videos had been one of the reasons behind them actually adding that. Because they were listening to, I think they were listening to our Mentour Now videos, or it could have been a Mentour Pilot incident video, where I made this point. Like, why wouldn't you, if you're making a new aircraft, why wouldn't you add this, which is such a perfectly logical thing to do?
Yeah.
And they added it, which is very cool.
Perfect.
Cool. Right. So I think that's it for that question. We'll take one more, and that's it. So the Schlapsbaten spielt. Sounds German. There's an open question, though. What could the pilots have done if they realized in time that they had no brakes? Could they do a belly landing? I'm guessing that this is in reference to one of our recent Mentor Pilot videos, where I think it was the Korean 631, where they landed and they had no brakes. No, I mean the pilots they had done what they could. They had no way of knowing that the brake reservoirs were running out of pressure because of a long-term fault that no one knew about. So what they did was correct. And belly landings, interestingly enough, is not a great way to stop an aircraft. I mean, we saw that in the Jeju accident that happened just a few months ago. it just does not, like a belly landing does not decelerate the aircraft very well.
And you also lose the ability often to select reverse thrust.
Yep.
Because the engines are scraping on the ground.
Yep. And I mean, the best thing you have is you get the aircraft down on the ground. In this case, the spoilers didn't work, but when they do work, the spoilers takes away the lift from the wings. The weight of the aircraft goes down onto the wheels, which are made to decelerate. Like that's why you have rubber, because it gives a good grip on the runway. And then you have several sequential brakes that make sure that there's no skid, and it just maximizes the braking. So that is what we're always chasing for. When it comes to the 631, there were discussions about whether or not they could have re-engaged the hydraulic pump on the faulty system, but all of that assumes that the pilots are thinking outside of the box and that they know that they're not going to have brakes, but they didn't. They had no idea. They follow. What we do is that we follow the procedures that are given to us, because we know that a lot more smart people, more of them and more smart, have been sitting in a room without any stress and have been thinking through all of the different potential scenarios and have come up with this emergency checklist to follow, because it will be the safest in the most, possible scenarios. So for us to start to under pressure, without the technical knowledge needed, start to rebuild these emergency procedures, generally is not a great idea.
And Boeing they even go so far as saying that troubleshooting, pilots trying to troubleshoot a problem from a technical perspective by switching things off and pulling circuit breakers, generally doesn't end well.
No, because I don't think people understand this, but I mean, we have a very good overall general technical knowledge of our aircraft, right? We understand all of it, and that includes like how the lavatories works and where the emergency equipment in the cabin is and how our controls work. But we don't have like minute technical knowledge of each and every system, because you can't. We're talking millions of parts in an aircraft. So you have to be a doctor in Boeing 737-800 specifically to know those, to come down to the technical or up to the technical level needed to do that. We just need to know, how does this work? Which non-normal checklist do we utilize to make sure that this is as safe as possible, and then follow the procedures that we've been taught in the simulator.
Yep.
That's what we do, right? So to sit there and this is typical for people sitting back in their seats, watching TV, and it's like, well, it would have been really smart to do this. Yeah, but now imagine you doing that in a metal tube that's traveling 300 kilometers per hour down the runway. How much extra capacity do you think you would have to actually make that kind of connection?
Yep.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't really work.
Yeah. And on that bombshell, we're an hour and 5 minutes into this very first podcast. This gives you an idea of how much we will be talking on these podcasts. I think that this has been great.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've loved it.
It's super easy because we just talk about things that we are passionate about.
Yeah.
So this is what you can expect. Like we said before, send in your questions if there's something you want us to discuss more. This is where we can do this really unfettered without anyone telling us what to do. Not that anyone can, but absolutely do so. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you put it into the comments. If you are listening to this as a podcast, our next podcast, we're going to have an email address ready for you that you can use. So I don't know, Ben, do you want to say any finishing words?
No, not really. Just other than, get involved. This is not just Petter and I. This is all of us here talking about aviation and what it affects. So get involved. Send in questions.
Absolutely. So for everyone who has been watching this very first video, excellent. So happy to have you here. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are. And I'll see and hear you next time.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.